Welcome to The Power Within, the podcast where we explore leadership, personal growth, and the dynamics that shape success. I'm Keith Power, and each week I sit down with inspiring individuals who share insights on leading with impact, building resilience, and unlocking potential. Through their experiences, we'll uncover the mindset and strategies that drive meaningful growth. Whether you're looking to evolve as a leader or gain new perspectives, this podcast is here to guide you. Today, I'm honoured to welcome Alex Yoong, a true pioneer in motorsports, as Malaysia's first ever Formula One driver, as we explore more stories of resilience, growth, and the power of determination. Alex has raced at the highest levels of motorsport. He has competed in Le Mans and in the Audi R8 LMS Cup, winning the championship 3 times in succession, 2014, 15 and 16. He now shares his expertise as a leading TV commentator and performance coach. Beyond racing, Alex has delved deep into mental resilience, leadership under pressure, and what it takes to perform at the absolute peak of human ability. His story is one of perseverance, adaptability, and high-speed decision-making. In this episode, we'll dive into Alex's experiences from the Formula One paddock to the broadcast studio, uncovering lessons in leadership, focus, and mental toughness that apply far beyond the racetrack. Let's get started. Alex, welcome to The Power Within.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Good to be here, mate.
Well, let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to get into motorsports, and how did your early racing experiences shape your competitive mindset?
Pretty lucky, to be honest. I think every kid growing up, so every boy growing up wants to be a race car driver or an astronaut or a fireman. I was no different. I remember one of my first memories, I think I might have been about 3, going to a racetrack, and my sister was in the pram next to me, and immediately understanding what's going on. You know, seeing the cars go around, lining up in the grid and starting, going, wow, I want to do that. And I was very lucky, like I said, because my family was into motorsports. So that allowed me to get into motorsports. Motorsports is pretty inaccessible. So that was a good, very, very fortunate indeed. So as I grew up, all I ever wanted to do was Formula One. And, my father, who looked after the Shah Alam circuit back then in Klang Valley in Malaysia, was like, okay, let's try and facilitate that. Let's try and make that happen. But it was still an incredible dream, we didn't even get Formula One on TV in Malaysia, I might have seen a Formula One race maybe 6 months later when someone brought it on VHS to the country. So, information was very sporadic. No idea how to do it, Local touring cars was quite good in the 90s, but Formula racing, single-seaters, what's that, No idea at all. So it was a very interesting journey, trying to get enough experience before I went to Europe to race. And as you mentioned, I've been around the block a bit, a journeyman driver, I guess you'd call me. Raced all over the place and had a pretty long career, actually.
And still going.
Yeah.
But you reached the pinnacle of motorsports, Formula One. What was it like stepping into that world? And what were the biggest lessons you learned about resilience and high-pressure decision-making?
Oof, that's a long answer. Obviously, getting to Formula One was pretty special, Went about it quite a roundabout way. Ran out of money very early on, and was trying to find our own sponsors. But of course, we had the financial crash in the late 90s, so the pound doubled to the ringgit. So that was tough for us. We had to go to Japan for a while. But when we made it to Formula One, I remember lining up in the grid. It was pretty surreal. The feeling was very surreal because, you're at Monza and you can hear the crowd through your helmet. Mostly for the Ferraris, but still, you could hear the crowd through your helmet. And
so Monza was your first F1?
Yeah.
And who was alongside you in the team?
Fernando Alonso was my teammate in Minardi, and that bugger's still going, funnily enough. Great talent that he is. Yeah, it was pretty surreal. I mean, you can't really emphasize how weird it is for a Malaysian at that time, because really had no knowledge of trying to get to Formula One. And to be honest, pretty much my whole career, the only one sticking to that dream was me and my dad, really, because it just seemed so far out, I only started driving at 16, driving Proton Sagas,
Okay.
So it was very strange trying to get the knowledge to compete with my peers. A lot of lessons. I think the thing, my father taught me the most is that anything's possible, really, because that really seemed like an impossible dream. Resilience, you got to stay in the race to keep going, when you're heavily in debt trying to finance one or two F3 races and don't race the whole of the year, trying to just stay in the game is probably the biggest lesson you can make, because, if you're not in the game, then your chances of making a big fat zero.
Of course.
But if somehow you're still there, then something can happen, and eventually it did.
But it's an expensive hobby, and it's an even more expensive profession to get into. So how did you fund that? Were you inundated with sponsors? Was your dad a millionaire or something else?
No, my family's from definitely middle class. Beg, borrow, and steal, mate. That's really the short answer. We were heavily in debt, but we gambled. Basically, we gambled. It was like poker. We went all chips in, basically, and just carried on going. I remember we sold the house that paid for 2 Formula 3 races in the UK. Two race weekends, that was it. There would be no Malaysian, well, up to that point, there'd be no one from Southeast Asia in the modern era of Formula One. So we thought, right, if we can just get on the cusp, maybe we can find the money to get into Formula One. So, yeah, all chips in, really. And, 𝐼𝐶𝐭 had been built in 96, 97, first Formula One race in 98. And that's basically what happened, We got the test from Minardi, it went really well, and we found some sponsorship from Magnum here in Malaysia, and that got me into the door. It still took me about 10 years, 15 years to pay off all the debt that we accrued along the way. But, yeah.
So who were your first sponsors in F1?
The lottery company, Magnum.
Oh, okay. So you weren't like Lewis Hamilton, who come from a simple, poor background, but was lucky enough to be spotted early and supported early. Yours was, the way you describe it, bootstrapping originally then.
I know many drivers, careers littered by the roadside on the way to Formula One, like you talk about Lewis. Lewis was quite fortunate, McLaren picked him up at 13, 14?
Yeah.
And he was the first of those drivers get picked up by Formula One teams from a very young age and escorted all the way up. Rightly so, had the talent for it. But I know a lot of other drivers who were as talented, and same sort of story, families just moving into caravans and going from track to track, trying to keep the career going, and never made it, I was a bit fortunate because I was the first Malaysian, so there was a bit of excitement around it. So, we were able to get over the line with that. But I remember a lot of drivers I was racing with in the UK and stuff who never made it. And they it's a tough business, because it's so expensive. Achieving your dream pretty much does cripple a lot of families. That's pretty much the dark side of it.
It was exciting, but being the first Malaysian driver as well, did you feel the pressure of that, the expectation?
Not really. It's kind of strange thing to say, but I never felt that, because there was a much far bigger pressure that as a sportsman you put on yourself to try and get the results. I always found it very funny when I saw drivers celebrating wins on the way up to higher level, because I never celebrated wins. For me, wins was it was more a relief than anything else, because you always just focus on what you can improve. And I've always noticed that with a lot of elite athletes. You're never happy with what you've got. You always want more. It's the next step. That was the mentality we had, trying to get up the ladder. And even though I did make Formula One, it never felt like a success to me, because I didn't want to make Formula One. I wanted to be Formula One world champion. So, of course, there was a lot of pressure around, but come on, what does that matter? You don't get into the sport unless you have a lot of high expectations and you're driven to do it. It can be a distraction and at times not very nice. But it was never as much as the pressure I myself was putting on myself to try and achieve the results I wanted to achieve. And I find that with all athletes, all athletes who have done very well, they are very much self-motivated. They self-correct because their expectations are very high, and if you're doing it just for the glory, and I do know drivers and athletes who have been in for the glory and they want the love and the respect, they soon drop off the ladder very early on. I don't see those sort of personalities really making it all the way to the top of the ladder.
I don't want to make this all about F1 because, as you said, your career is far greater than that, far beyond that, and continued. I've been lucky enough to be with you in a trackside, and I've seen you where you've come first, second, third, and have crashed out. You always seemed the calm, same self, regardless of what happened there, which was something I observed in you. You didn't show that big emotion. You really were, regardless of the result, calm and reflective, right?
The road to ultimate success is littered with failure. And if you're going to get excited about wins and you're going to get down about not wins or not finishing or bad performances, you're never going to make it. It's a long road, and it's a marathon. And, if you let the results affect you so much, it's hard to keep going the next day, When you're learning, there are a lot of things to learn. And if you do let those results affect you, then it's very hard to get up the next day. So you've got to keep everything in perspective. And that's the same with praise. At the beginning, when someone says you've done well, you really listen to it. You're like, yes, I've done well. It's great. Thank you for that. But then you notice those same people jumping on you when you don't do well. And then after a while, you kind of go, well, I'm accepting their praise, but I'm also letting their criticism reflect badly on me. And then I look at the criticism and I thought, well, do they have a valid point? And most of the time they don't, because they have no idea the preparation or what's gone into it or the circumstance. So when I realized that, well, if that's the case, if their criticism is not valid because they don't know the steps leading up to it, then their praise is not valid either.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, you can't pick and choose.
Yeah.
And that was very easy. So that made it a lot easier for me. So when I got someone's praise, it was irrelevant to me, just as much as the criticism was irrelevant to me. I found a very good way of balancing out stuff because then you're not affected by what happens around you. You're your own person, your own island. You make your own energy. You're not dependent on other people to supply that. And that's quite a powerful thing.
Motorsports is one of those sports I see a lot of sons follow their fathers. And I know we're talking gender, just male, but generally, there's a lot of it. Your own son, Alistair, he races.
Yeah.
How is he managing? And probably more to the point, how is he funding things? Is he rich dad?
No. Like I said, it took me a long time to pay back all the debt I owned. So especially not modern motorsports, it's very expensive. So my son coming into the sport was very interesting because there was a lot of stuff about the motorsport scene that, left a bit of a sour taste in my, it was tough, So it's not something that I do lightly. It's not something that I take lightly. I guess some dads want their sons or daughters to follow in their footsteps and some don't. I think I fell into the category of don't. My idea of, because it's work for me, the last thing I want to do on a free weekend is follow my son for a go-kart race. I don't feel I have unfinished business or anything like that. Sport's given me a lot for sure, but there's also other things in life. And if I have a free weekend, do I really want to go spend it at a go-kart track? Perhaps not, And Alistair didn't really show much interest to begin with, so I was like, fine, great, let's see what he wants to do. But I think about 13, 14, he started showing an interest. And I felt that my father had put so much effort for me, it was only right that I pass it on. So, obviously helped him get into the sport. And it was actually very cool because it gave us a lot to talk about. It gave us a lot in common. And the sport is a good sport for building character, and I could see that with Alistair and, But I definitely didn't go into it saying I was going to do everything for him. I was like, hey, Al, you got to put in the work yourself. So he often gets left on his own. He was racing the last 2 years in Europe. I didn't go once to see him. Not because I didn't want to. I did want to, but it was, time was busy and I was focused on what I was doing here. And also, he had to really, if he wanted to do this, he had to figure it out himself. So we were always there for him as much as we could. We didn't cuddle him. And he's been going off. He's been getting drives in India and Europe here and there.
Right.
Yeah, but he's at the very beginning of his career still. Still got a long way to go.
Where's he racing at the moment then? What's he doing?
Well, he's been racing in India. Won a championship there called Indian Racing League.
Wow.
But yeah, he's still trying to find sponsorship to go to Europe because, if you really want a long career, you need to get to Europe and do well there because that's where all the manufacturers are. It's where the best teams are. You can have a longish career in Europe if you can succeed. So he's still trying to do that. He's still trying to find the sponsorship, go GT racing. He started a bit old for Formula One. Formula One, you got to be young and you got to be in Europe. His whole family has to be in Europe at a very young age, like 7, 8, 9 sort of thing. He's trying to go endurance racing, Le Mans.
Anyone listening, by the way, who would like to sponsor a young talent with pedigree, please contact me or Alex.
Yeah, absolutely.
So racing is about precision, split-second choices. How did you train your mind to handle that level of intensity? And what lessons do you think that business leaders and professionals can take from that?
Well, you see a lot of back and forth between the business world and the sports world, right? There's been a lot of lessons. We talk about this a lot, Keith, right? A lot of lessons that go between both, and it's not just sports, it's business, actually. There's been some interesting stuff that I've seen go the other way as well. Understanding of how anything is possible, managing your emotions, that's all come really well from the sports world to the business world. But also from the business world, trying to have control of your environment and having the team around to support you, how you manage your time, all these sort of aspects. I've seen it kind of go back between both worlds. In the sports world, a lot of it has to do with just by yourself, and actually, Keith, this is more of a question for you from me, really, is how do you as a CEO manage that? Because as CEO, you have so many, you're very, you're in a web of a whole organization that you have to pull a lot of strings and how it works like that. Sportsman is not so much like a CEO. He's like more of, say, because he's really more concerned with his own performance. He's more like the talented engineer or the talented software writer that has to be managed, but he doesn't have to worry about the web around him.
Yes.
So that's actually a good question for you. How does that work?
And by the way, you over-promoted me. I was President Asia Pacific. I reported to a CEO. I never quite made it there, but I was happy in my world here. The difference, I want to pick up on you talking about the growth mindset. I think that is super important, whether you're in business, sport, or just developing your career. And for me, what was similar was ensuring you had that team around you that you could rely on. And building the team is what made me and the organization look good. Because, and as a driver, if you don't have that tight team around you, the engineers, the strategists, the people who are fundraising for you, and various other things that go on in the background, I think that's where the similarity is of a CEO and a sports person. They need the team around them in order to be good to great.
Yeah. So it's interesting. That's one thing I've noticed, because when I was a driver, I was very uncompromising. If I felt I wasn't getting what I needed, I'd do whatever I could to make sure that person was removed and I had someone else. Right. Plug or play. Next. But as a business owner now, it's quite different.
Very. Yeah. You cannot be as ruthless in the business side when you're dealing with people as you can where You are the product. You are the emphasis is on you as a racing driver. So you have to be uncompromising, right?
Yeah, because also in a way, as a sportsman, your resources are defined, the resources to be used. Like I don't have to go find sponsorship. I mean, I do, but once I'm in the race team, I don't have to go find the money. I don't have to hire the people. I don't have to find those people. So I'm just in my little cocoon. I can go, this is what I need. This is what I want. This is what I don't want. But you can't bring that up when the whole business is, when you're in charge of the whole web, can you? Because you can't just keep plugging and playing people. You have to develop the people, or you have to grow the company more before you can afford the people you want. And there's a lot more push and pull and compromise than when you're just a sportsman, where it's all just about performance and elite athletes. This is the way we go. And it's not just to the drivers, I find, because in a Formula One environment, it's such a big business. So it's not just the drivers that can afford to do that. You have certain engineers that are uncompromising, and they say, listen, this is what I want, the 𝐬𝐮𝐸𝐫𝐞 Newey's of this world. But I think sometimes I look at now I have a different mindset. Now I'm a bit older and I have my own business. I look at people like Christian Horner or Toto Wolff, and I'm like, wow, you got to manage a lot of individuals who are uncompromising. But you have to, because those are the guys that produce the results. Those are the guys that get you what you need. And how you have to manage that is so interesting to me, because it's quite tricky, I'd imagine.
Me looking at your side, that looks tricky, and you looking to this side looks tricky. But now you've crossed over to the other side. You are an entrepreneur, a business owner. You are now dealing with that. So how have you adapted then? Did you have any difficulty with taking that uncompromising attitude and instead being a little more inclusive?
Okay, so again, it comes back to the growth mindset. And I realized I had to be very humble. Couldn't just assume what I knew before would work now. And part of that was realizing I've had 25 years as a driver. That's a lot of experience. I know how to drive. I know how to coach. I know what a driver needs to have. I know what outcome goals he needs. I know what process goals he needs. But as a business owner, I've only got 5 years experience. And even then, do I have the attributes? Will I ever have the attributes to compete against someone who's been a business owner for 35 years? Will I have the same work ethic? Will I have the same understanding of the nuances of relationships? And I had to go, no chance. It's impossible. It's not enough just think, I just want it more than anyone else. That's a load of crap. So I set about thinking, okay, what are the things I need to learn? Who do I need to try and work with who can help me learn? So my outcome and process goals changed completely. I first had to define what were the attributes I needed to work on and understand, so that I could make better decisions. So it's a very interesting journey, and that's why I talk about the compromise and trying to understand when is the right time to push and pull. That's been the hardest thing to learn. Whereas instead you could just be like, no, that's it. No, you can't. So the nuances of that has been tricky, but it's been a lot of fun trying to work out.
But you didn't make like this sudden change. You had a transition in where you moved into TV commentary, coaching. So that was a totally different environment, a transitionary time at that time. So how did you manage that shift, and how has that broadened your perspective on performance per se?
Going into TV was not something I enjoyed. It took me a long time. I did eventually enjoy it, but maybe it was like after 10 years of being F1 pundit, I realized one day, actually, this is quite fun. But for the first 10 years, I was very miserable about it. It's not something that I enjoyed. And then I got better at it once I started to enjoy it. But I never really treated it with the same mindset as I did when I took my sports. I would try and do it well, but I wasn't too fussed about it too. I never had that same mindset. It's only when I came into the business side and the coaching side, of course, where you're like, okay, no, that's, the same feelings, the same triggering that you get when you're trying to do your sport. It's like, all right, how do I really get the most out of every single moment that I'm here to try and improve, to get the best possible result? Then that started to trigger it. So TV was interesting. It was something that I started to enjoy doing. I loved trying to be succinct, to try and get your message across as succinctly as possible instead of being overburdened with the words and not being able to get your point across. So that was interesting. But the growth mindset was never, for me, really triggered in TV. But it has been triggered in trying to run your own business because the competitiveness is definitely there. It's the level of competitiveness trying to run your own business is intense.
You spoke earlier about pride. One of my proudest moments, I have to say, was when you were late going to a TV studio and I drove you there and you complimented me on my driving. You can't believe how big my head was after I dropped you off at the studio that day.
Oh dear. Awesome.
Yeah, but driving through Singapore at speed takes some doing as well, as I'm sure you know.
You still got your license then?
I've never lost a license, and both my UK and my Singapore licenses, I need to touch some wood, are points free as well. So, Alex, you've worked with young drivers and teams at various levels. What do you think are the greatest attributes that separate great drivers and great leaders from the rest?
Your weaknesses have to be very reduced in every aspect. It's kind of interesting when don't know so much about the sport you're in. You think talent is the most important thing, and then as you get into the sport and you understand you understand that actually it's not that complicated, but there's a lot of things to do, a lot of stuff to work at, whether it's mentally or physically or technically. There's a lot of stuff. The more you get into the sport, then you start to realize hard work is far more important. As long as you have a small measurable amount of talent, hard work, it's 10 times more important. And you look at the work ethic of someone. So that becomes the most overriding thing. The more you are in a sport and you actually do it professionally, you soon start seeing that everyone at the top has the same work ethic. And then you start noticing, here's where the little bit of talent can make a difference once everyone starts having that work ethic. If I was going to say it was just one thing, there is something about, which I like to call clarity. Clarity of thought is very important. And that does not correlate with intelligence. I know a lot of intelligence athletes who don't have that clarity and they can get muddled in their own minds and it takes energy and they never quite achieve their full potential. But the guys that really are good at achieving their full potential, that aren't just merely good but really great, they have that clarity. I always see them, that seems to be the common theme, meaning having a good idea where the big picture is, not expending energy on getting too down or too up, really focusing on what the important parts are. Whether it's, okay, this is not working, let's move on to this. Or this is not working, let's move on to this. Or no, I got to persevere with this a bit longer. Having that clarity of thought and not to get muddled into a lot of biasness that you sometimes undergo, like you have the fallacy of putting in so much work in a certain area, but because you've had so much work in that area, you keep on pushing in that point. It's very hard to change and pivot. I always find the guys are very top people like Nicole David in squash and some of the others that I've met over the time. They always seem to have that clarity in thought. They don't get bogged down. And that's obviously assuming everything else is perfect.
Yeah.
Good amount of talent, work ethic, all that.
What was coming through as well, it seems to me, that clarity is to control your emotions, to have a better control, not allowing your emotions to be too up, too down, so that you can retain that clarity, right? And
that's what I find with a lot of them is they don't have to work too hard at it. They have a very balanced stuff. Me as an athlete, I know my emotions sometimes get the better of me. So I had to work at it a lot. And for a period, I really struggled. But over time, I figured what was behind these emotional swings, and then it got better, And once you figure it out and you are naturally calm and it's not a fight to control, that's when it starts to take off. Because some guys just have it naturally and they're just very measured and it's not an issue, But some drivers or some athletes, you need to spend a lot more time controlling it. And the mental skills training you do early on in your career is key. But if you're still fighting it, I find the guys who are fighting it, they have to always fight against it every day. That's a lot of energy. And at the top, when you're fighting against someone that doesn't have to fight it. It makes a big difference.
It took me well into my 40s before I stopped fighting and got that measured calm, which obviously paid off. But I wasted 10 or 20 years before that. You've spoken a few times about being an athlete. Most people here would know you as a commentator and as a driver, but you do have another athletic side, a performance competitor side. Do you want to share that?
I used to water ski when I was too small to get into a race car. I liked it a lot, did it to a high level, Asian level. I think in the mid-90s I might have been ranked 4 in Asia. So like about, I don't know, a few years ago, I came back just to do the SEA Games for fun. So we did the SEA Games in, I think, 2011, 2013, managed to win a gold. That was pretty special. I really enjoyed that because I didn't really give myself much time to train and managed to get to a really high level in a short period of time. And yeah, it was good fun.
As you said, hard work, yes, but you had the talent. The talent was still there. How old were you when you won that gold medal then? You was relatively old.
Yeah, 35, and I hadn't been skiing for 15 years. So luckily I was still fit from driving, so I was able to get pretty fit quite quickly, although they're two completely different sports. But yeah, no, it was fun to do.
It also talks to your mindset that you can transition from one sport to another, which is so different. And yes, the fitness was there, but you needed the talent and you needed the application. That was great. I remember following it. I thought, oh my God, what's he going to do next?
But good fun. I've always loved my sport. And now what I do next is what you do, trying to look at seeing on the business side of things.
Always happy to help. So back to motorsports, though. It's evolving with technology, sustainability, new racing formats. What do you see as the future for the sport, and how should professionals take from that and adapt to constant change?
It's a golden period right now with Formula One and Netflix. The drivers coming in. It's exciting to watch. So there is a golden period. And what's going to happen next? Not really sure on a global level. I think Formula One, like I said, is in for a golden period. I think WEC is in for a golden period. A lot of manufacturers are back in the sport. I don't think EV is the way to go. I think with what they're doing in Formula One and WEC, with a bit of hybrid engines is the way to go. But I can tell you what I do think about a lot is what is the future here in Southeast Asia? Okay. That's very interesting because I still do a lot of coaching. I made Formula One and it was a really interesting off the beaten path journey. And I still see that we have a big problem here because we don't have many Southeast Asian drivers in Formula One. Okay, we've got Alex Yoong from Thailand who's there now, but we haven't had another Malaysian driver come through to Formula One. So we spend a lot of time trying to think about how do we do that? Because it's not feasible to try and do it the old-fashioned way, which is, okay, I'll just find an 8-year-old, dump him in Italy so he can learn to kart for 10 years with his family, spend 15 million euros to get him into a position where he can perhaps get ready for Formula One. Easy, right? That's not really attractive to me because A, it's a really big gamble. It's a lot of money. And B, it doesn't benefit Southeast Asia. That's a driver going to Europe, spending a lot of money in Europe, no money back here. No money helps the local industry. And the industry for motorsports in Southeast Asia has been stagnant since the 90s. In fact, you could say it's even got worse. So we are looking to try and find another alternatives to get world-class drivers from the region. And how do we do that when we don't have the facilities here in Southeast Asia? We can't go to a racetrack. There's one racetrack in Malaysia. There are 2 in Thailand, 1 in Indonesia, none in Singapore. So what my theory is, we found a way to disrupt that. And that's through esports, simulator racing. So we spend a lot of time coaching drivers on the sim now. And what we've discovered is that pretty much we can replicate every lesson I've learned over the 25 years I was a driver on the sim. And that's been a very interesting journey because we're getting a lot of drivers now coming through who are already boom at a very high level. And so we bring them to real life racing now and they're beating everyone in real life racing. Because the guys who real life race in Southeast Asia, they might race at one track, on one kind of car, and that's it. Whereas the sim guys, they're doing Le Mans one weekend, they're doing Daytona another weekend, they're on ovals, they're on DTM cars and Formula cars. So they come more well-rounded. And I think for Southeast Asia, this is the future. In Europe, it's different where you have the infrastructure and the money to do it. Here in Southeast Asia, we have neither. So sim racing is the way we're doing it. And it's been very exciting to be a part of that. I firmly believe if you want to be an expert at something, you need 10,000 hours, and you just can't get that in real life. But we can get there in the simulator. And that's been exciting to do.
But in any sport, 10,000 hours seems to be the golden number that you need that level of experience. And I hadn't thought of it like that before, that it was feeding them towards F1. But what about the sustainability of this sim racing in terms of finances? How do you get that financed then?
Yeah, so that is the big problem that we struggle with. Because if you want to go to Formula 1 or Formula 3 or World Endurance Championship, the cost is still prohibitive, So even if we find these special drivers, and we do, I'm finding drivers now that I can tell you are better than I've ever been or ever could be, They just need the opportunity to go to Europe and, the right drive with someone. I know that it could snowball from there. But still, making those first steps is incredibly expensive. That the gap has just grown over the years, and there's no simple answer to that, But by trying to give value to sponsors, through what they do in the sim. We're trying to get our sim drivers, eventually esports will be the Olympics. First, our drivers winning the Olympics maybe one day, or Asian Games next year and stuff. These are the sort of things that can snowball. Toyota have a very good program. They've been putting a lot of drivers into real life cars from sim, and they've just been kicking ass. The national champion last year is a sim driver in real life in the Toyota super sporting class. So, on a national level, we're seeing it in Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia already. But how do we get to the global level? How do we get to the really expensive stuff? Now, these are drivers that can't go to Formula 1. Yeah, Formula 1, you have to be in the machine at a very young age because you won't go to Formula 4, won't go to Formula 3. You need to be in that cartel. But these drivers can go to other world championships. They could have success in Formula E. They could have success in World Endurance Championship. They could win Le Mans. They could win the Indy 500 one day. That's all possible. But we still need to get them into those junior levels and stuff, because we still have a problem here in Southeast Asia where the industry is stagnant. So there's no big local touring car championship to put them in.
Which is a pity.
It is a pity. That doesn't mean we don't try. And maybe in 10 years, there'll be tracks in Vietnam. Maybe Malaysia will finally have a second track. Then things will start to snowball again, because the bottleneck is the lack of facilities. But I think if that bottleneck could be broken, I think it would expand pretty quickly, because motor racing is at an all-time high. You see a lot of money coming to the sport, thanks to Netflix. We just need more facilities.
Perhaps thinking beyond Southeast Asia, not towards Europe. I'm thinking China, I'm thinking Japan, where they do have the facilities, whereas Southeast Asia is sadly lacking those facilities. Perhaps there's opportunity to work more broadly across the whole of Asia to take advantage of what they have that you don't have in Southeast Asia, perhaps.
Exactly. And China's a very good market to talk about. Japan still running the same problems. The cost in Japan to go racing is very high. We need different solutions. There's why the cost has spiraled so much over the last 30 years is quite incredible, because the technology for a lot of these cars is not much different from 30 years ago, but the costs have quadrupled in a lot of these championships.
I was really excited when the Audi LMS Cup came to Shanghai, and that's where we met up again.
Yeah.
That was quite an exciting race format for me.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're at those events, there are other formulas, the Porsches race, etc., etc. But you never see anything of that in Singapore. Never. All you have is the F1 once a year. It's a glamorous affair. It's a night race, etc. But that's it. And then it's closed down until next September again, right?
Exactly. So we need to look at what's more sustainable, and I think the MSS in Singapore are thinking along those lines. but we need to see what can we support locally that keeps the money in the region.
Yes.
Because that's really the key for any sport.
And Sepang is a fabulous circuit, but in my opinion, underutilized as well, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's a chicken and egg situation, right?
Absolutely. We won't go into that, but we definitely need another facility. I mean, Sepang, Sepang's fully booked all the time. Actually, a lot of the Singapore car clubs book it. But if you want to do...
most of them race up the expressway on their way there, mind.
But if you want to grow local grassroots racing, you need other facilities which are cheaper and available for people to go to.
Yeah, my son's still racing. He's 43, and I think he was 36 when he finally won the junior championship of motocross. And we met with Lewis Hamilton in Singapore, and I think this was a genuine reaction from Lewis when he said, "Oh yeah, I race, I'm in motocross." And Lewis says, "Oh my God, I'm so jealous. I always wanted to do that, but my dad kept me focused in the go-kart and on four wheels, etc., etc." But he funds himself. It's just for fun. It costs a lot of money, even at that level. But proper motorsport on proper tracks is so cost prohibitive. We're not going to answer the funding issue here today, but I'd like to see motorsport take a bigger piece of the market in Asia, and especially in Southeast Asia. We won't solve that today. Move on a little. You said earlier about, we talked about this mindset thing. You've experienced both triumphs and struggles of an elite athlete. What's been the toughest challenge in your career, and how did you overcome it?
Life is not easy, right? I mean, you talk about career stuff. I mean, I look back at it and I sometimes look at that kid that was so fixated on not having that success or didn't quite reach it. And I remember how tough it was for that person. I think, wow, it's just a stupid car racing event. It's just a silly sport. It's not life or death. And
far more important than that.
But to that kid, it was the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's far more important than death. It's far more important. But, life is tough. You got to look after yourself. You look after families, loved ones. You lose loved ones. Recovering from all this stuff. That's really the hard part in life. And then sometimes I look back and oh my gosh, Alex, you were really fixated on some things that really aren't that important. But I don't trivialize it, because I remember how important it was to that person, and I remember how tough it was, because it was life. Like I said, I never had success in Formula One as far as I'm concerned. For me, I want to be Formula One world champion, not just reach Formula One.
99.9999% of the listeners will just be going, I dream of being where Alex has been.
Yeah, for me, going to Formula One is never the goal. Formula One world champion was. So I look back at it now and I think I'm pretty happy with the career I've had. But to that kid back then, he was devastated when the results didn't happen and he was out of Formula One. So that was a tough moment. And it took me a while, but I go back to that lesson I said earlier on, which was trying to be happy with the improvements you can see and not measure success by just things like Formula One world champion or winning this, and trying to reframe them and trying to understand why it was so difficult, So, and part of it was realizing, my God, this is really silly to actually step back and go, listen, man, I mean, this is, really silly. It's not important in the grand scheme of things. The important thing is, did you do a good job at the end? And did you do your best? And did you really see that improvement? And I had to go, I really had these moments where I really improved really well. And no one would see it. And I just had to go, well,
but you did.
I did.
And one thing you picked up on,
you have to be good with that.
Something I keep hearing from all guests, this trick, if you want to call it, of reframing. How you look at something and then reframing it, looking from a different perspective. Like if you look in here, I've got a microphone here, you can't see this side, you can only see that side. Just by changing your perspective and reframing things, it's a whole different ball game, right?
Yeah. And the trick is, and it's not a trick, it doesn't work if you lie to yourself.
Of course, you must be authentic and true.
Yeah, because your true body knows when you're lying to yourself, and it doesn't work. So if you try to just say, no, you're just better than everyone. There's a part of you that knows you're just talking, talking crap.
I say that to myself all the time. I said, you can do podcasting, but I'm here, good or bad. Here I am.
But if you reframe it and go, listen, look in the context of this. Yes, it was crap, but actually, let's look at the backstory. Let's see what it did, and if you can take the power away from everyone else and just give the power to yourself, meaning that you are the decider of whether that job was good, and if you measure to those levels, then you're good with that. And if you can genuinely do that, then it works really well. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that takes a while. Because even though you reframe it, it takes a while for your mind to accept it.
No, that's true. Absolutely.
But if you do get there, then you know you're onto something.
So coming on then to mental resilience is crucial in motorsports and beyond. What would you say, Alex, are your top strategies for staying mentally strong, whether in competition, business, or even in life?
In the beginning, it was just keep going no matter how bad it gets. And you just had to struggle and struggle and struggle and struggle. And it worked. But there was a great cost to me, to my health, to how I looked at things, how I was as a person to other people, because it made me less. What I found later, again, was reframing. So I'll give you a good example. We're trying to do this. We're trying to get our sim drivers into real-life racing and world champion one day. But instead of getting disappointed when it doesn't happen, I look at the grand picture and I look at it, listen, is this feasible to work? Is it really, do you think that there's a chance of it working? And I have to stand back and go, actually, the chance of this working is probably 0.
Okay.
And I said, do you still want to do this knowing that you're probably going to fail? And then I kind of go, yeah, I enjoy what I'm doing it. You might fail at this. So if you know this and you're getting into it, there's no reason for it to be a struggle. That changed the whole perspective. Instead of, I must make this work no matter what, and I'm a failure if I don't make this work, I'm like, nah, man, it's never going to work. But I'm still going to try. I still believe it can work. It's a small chance, but I'm realistic. So that means any effort we put in, any pain we put in, you own that pain, you own that effort. And it doesn't become pain. It becomes a challenge. It becomes a project that you've decided to do with yourself. And it becomes much more interesting, and it takes away the whole fear of failure, because you don't see it as failure. It's something you are doing because you want to do it, because you enjoy doing it. It's the best, and you're not going to be affected by the outcome.
So a mutual friend of ours was my last guest, 𝐟𝐸𝐫𝐸𝐻, and one of the key points he made, he said he doesn't even recognize failure in his lexicon. For him, it's either success or it was a learning. It was an education.
Yeah.
So
I buy that.
Yeah, it reset my mind on that, I'll be honest. So let's get to our final point, sadly running out of time. For aspiring leaders, athletes, anyone else listening, what's the one piece of advice you'd give on mastering performance when under pressure?
Again, you have to be realistic about what you expect. I had this conversation with someone the other day. They said, how do you choose who to work with? Because you need to choose people that are hungry, who want it. And I'm like, no, I disagree. I find pretty much everyone wants it. But sometimes you have to realize that they haven't yet learned how big their capacity of want is. Because when you first start out, your desire or want you think is here, and you do anything, but you don't really understand how much you can grow your appreciation for appetite. So I believe it is possible for people to have a bigger appetite, to have more resilience, but they need to give themselves a break. And a lot of people go, oh, I can't do it, and then they stop, but they don't realize that they haven't grown their appetite yet. And that appetite gets grown with success, with failures, mostly through failures. But if you can see those failures as learning experiences and go, it's going to take time, it keeps you in the game. long enough for the appetite to grow. And it's staying in that game that is the biggest thing. Because I see most people stop before they've even begun because they see them as failures instead of opportunities to learn.
It's only when you give up that you have actually lost. Only in that moment, right? Until then, you're still in the game.
Absolutely. Well said.
Alex, as always, every conversation I've ever had with you is fascinating and insightful. I've really appreciated your time, your sharing. The journey you've had has been amazing. The thing is, you're still on your journey.
Yep.
You're just in a different phase. I'm just waiting to hear on the news what third sport Alex Yoong is now winning a gold medal in.
Yes.
So thank you for today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing on the mindset that it takes to be successful, and appreciate you being on The Power Within. I look forward to seeing you again next time you're in, as you call, Singers.
Yes, my pleasure, mate. Really good seeing you, and catch up soon.
Thanks for listening to The Power Within. I hope today's episode inspired you to grow, lead, and create the success you deserve. If you enjoyed the podcast, share it with someone who might find it valuable. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Join us next time as we explore more stories of leadership and personal growth. And remember that setbacks are just stepping stones to something greater. Until then, stay strong, stay positive, and keep believing in the power within.